Welcome to the wonderfully weird world of the Tinfoil Hat Fan Club, where we talk about all the batshit crazy stuff that goes on in the world, and there is loads. On today's episode, I want to talk about the Colares incident of 1977. Happened in Brazil, okay, and the difference with this one is UFOs were actually attacking people for their blood and their DNA, apparently. So, stick around and I will tell you all about it. Okay then, gang, thanks for sticking around. Now, this is sometimes referred to as the Colares Island invasion. The events, which began in the summer of 1977 and would result in an official Brazilian Air Force operation that would stretch into 1978, is one of the most intense waves of UFO activity ever witnessed. During the several months of the incident, hundreds of encounters would take place. Each would also seemingly offer a new detail for UFO investigators, many of whom had ventured to the region before the military arrived there. Okay, while the military would admit to several significant injuries to some of the residents of the island, some researchers would go further, suggesting there were even deaths. There was even talk among some researchers in the UFO community that over 400 people had their blood sucked by the strange UFOs. What are these UFOs doing? Okay, what are they looking for? DNA? They looking for blood? Is it part of the hybrid initiative that apparently is going on with these aliens? We do not know, do we? Now, this case, the four fishermen, that's what I'm going to talk about now, would attract the interest of several UFO researchers. However, okay, while this account is one of the better known ones, it is simply one of many sightings that took place on the island at the time, okay? But I will tell you about the four fishermen. Right then, that night, shortly after midnight, four fishermen sat in their small boat near the island of Crab. Suddenly, an intense light approached them and settled upon the boat. Now, according to the reports, the incident would result in two of the fishermen receiving major injuries, while the third one, regretfully, would even die. From this incident, events, activities and sightings would build significantly. The Island of Crabs incident was only the first of many around the Colares Island region. However, in an age before the internet, with the region already isolated somewhat and with communications being poor, most of the reports remain local. However, local or not, they would steadily continue, and by June, several newspapers from outside the region were beginning to pick up on the accounts, even more so throughout July and August of 1977. They would state, for example, how the strange aerial sightings were causing suspense and panic among the population of the Colares Island. They would describe an unidentified device that would stun with a light jet and then remove their blood. Furthermore, several strange Y-shaped crafts with a flame at the bottom had been seen by thousands of people. It would conclude that local residents dare not leave their homes in the evening in case one of those strange UFOs, which emits a luminous light of great heat that burns the skin of its targets, should pick them as their next victim. One of the areas particularly affected by heavy sightings was the town of Pinario, so much so that the mayor would contact the Aeronautics Command in São Luís seeking advice on how to avoid a widespread panic. And he would state, this is in his own words, okay, the object does not emit any sound. It has huge speed. It stops at any point and it follows in any direction. Many people fishing on boats were chased by this fireball and left many people sick. They had a fever and their eyes were burning. The UFO light was so strong that the night looked like day. Now, from this communication, a report went to Belém Air Force Base. However, the activity was about to get even more alarming. Now, there are several almost forgotten about reports of sightings of these strange aerial blood-sucking crafts from the month of July. They are largely thanks to the work of UFO researcher Daniel Rapiso Geese, who has researched the Chupa Chupa case extensively, and the locals called these UFOs the Chupa Chupa. Many of the sightings around this time would unfold in the Gurupi River area, leading Geese to refer to them as the groupie phase sightings, okay? For example, a report in the newspaper on the 12th of July 1977 would report that a flying object emitting strong light was sucking blood from the population. They would also report on the genuine fear of the local residents who feared they might be the next victim of the vampire-like light. The report would also state that 2 local men had died as a result of the bizarre blood-sucking glows. Now, it would also become apparent to the local population during these sightings that flames, fires, and even something as small as a cigarette light would attract the attention of these deadly glowing objects. One particular incident that would stand out took place on a farm in the Penar region. At the insistence of the owner of the farm, a group of 26 workers remained erecting fences long into the night. One of the workers would take a trip to the nearby river in order to get some fish to provide dinner for everyone once the work had been done. Now, as he stood on the riverbank, a blue-white glowing light appeared in the sky overhead. Immediately scared, because he'd heard about what's going on, he dropped all of his possessions and ran back to the group. As he did so, the strange object followed him, casting its blue glow to the ground below. The group watched as the craft hovered for about 45 minutes before moving away. 45 minutes, can you imagine? Now, another one, several days later, 41-year-old Jau Barros, along with 2 friends, was fishing in a river. It was around 1 a.m. when suddenly a glowing object appeared in front of the boat. It was glowing red in the middle, but a light blue-green on the outer edges. The glowing orb-like craft would pass close to the boat and disappear. Barros, however, whose back to the glow as it passed, suffered intense burning pains in his back for several days following. Was that radiation? Was this UFO emitting radiation? That's why Barros had a bad back. Now, a similar encounter took place in nearby Mata do Olimpio. That evening after dark, Antonio Olimpio would leave his house and cross his yard to use the outside toilet, as you do. As he made his way there, however, a glowing red object appeared overhead. Immediately terrified due to the reports, he turned and ran back to the house screaming for his wife. Before he could reach the door, though, he fell to the ground. Now, his wife, by now at the doorway due to her husband's cry for help, reached out to him and pulled him back into the house. As she did so, however, he could feel an intense burning on his back, arm and legs. The burning sensation would last for the rest of the evening despite constant compressions of cold water applied by his wife. Now, the incidents were becoming increasingly regular, and that was obvious to anyone who had spent even a short time in the area. One television reporter would state in his report that about 90% of the people they talked to had seen UFOs, and a lot of the fishermen got burnt. There were not serious burns, but the men were so afraid that they did not want to go to work. Now, one of the most brutal encounters takes place in mid-July. One evening, farm worker Alfredo Marques Suarez was walking to his friend's house nearby when he suddenly felt a pain in the back of his leg. He turned around and immediately noticed a glowing yellow-white object. He felt a pulling sensation and, at the same time, realised he couldn't move his leg. Alfredo would cling to the post of a fence near to where he stood. All the while, waves of intense heat then cold, then heat again would wash over him as if emanating from the strange craft. Now, the craft light was also so intense that for the most part he would keep his eyes completely shut just in case it blinded him. Then the craft's grip appeared to loosen a little. Almost instinctively, he let go of the post and ran, his legs in pain but under his control. He would take shelter under a cashew tree and watch as the strange object ascended high into the sky and disappeared. Sounded like he got away with it there, didn't he? Just by the skin of his teeth. Now, deciding to cancel his planned trip as you would, he would head back home to proper examine his leg. When he did so, he was shocked to see it was bruised in the extreme. In fact, it was almost black, as if completely burnt. That's nasty, right? The following day, his leg was worse, full of blisters and apparent fast-developing infections. Furthermore, he was racked with intense stomach and back pains, and for several days would suffer from intense diarrhea. Again, that sounds like a radiation sickness, doesn't it? Although he would eventually recover, he would require crutches to walk for almost 3 months following the incident. Now, as dramatic as Suarez's encounter was, several days earlier, an encounter of a closer kind would take place. Perhaps accounts even less spoken of are those of apparent alien abductions that would take place within the chaos of the wave of encounters. Now, I'll tell you a story, right? At 1 a.m. in the early hours of the 10th of July, 1977, Halsey Bonetto Boje was set up from his house in order to catch a bus. But before he even reached the bus stop, his even would take a drastic turn. As he walked along the path, he noticed a brightly glowing blue-green object hovering in the middle of the road in front of him. Boje watched the glowing object for several seconds before a strange beam of light emerged from him and came into his direction. The next thing he knew, he was in a strange room that was unfamiliar to him. All around him were several small creatures, apparently going about their business. Then, several of these creatures grabbed him and moved him into another strange destination. Before he knew what was happening, however, he was waking up lying on the ground. It was morning, about 8:30 a.m., so 7 hours later, and he was several miles away from where he remembered. He had intense pain running down the right side of his body. However, he would slowly make his way back home to Penararo. He would remain in pain and would walk with some difficulty for several weeks following the encounter. Just where had he been and who had taken him there? However, all of that remains a mystery. His encounter is unlikely to be unique to the region during this time. Even though I haven't heard any more people say that, he probably wasn't the first and the last, eh? Now, one thing worth mentioning, though, is an apparent mystery cure of his partial sight and hearing difficulty. Shortly after the incident, he would realise his sight and hearing had returned to full working order. That's crazy, isn't it? As August began, the sightings and incidents began to increase and would ultimately to the involvement of the Brazilian military. Now, many of these sightings began to move to the Salgado region, and once more, they were almost identical to those witnessed in the Grupi River area throughout July, a strange light that would appear far away one moment and then close up the next. These were usually followed by a paralysing light beam, which also caused intense pain. This is where we began to get further details from the accounts, okay? While in the control of the initial laser beam, another beam would emerge from the beam itself and hit the witness on a part of their body, such as their legs or arm. Now, local reports would state that it was through this secondary beam where these strange entities took the person's blood or their DNA. The panic in the local population was palpable and would lead to another mayor publicly declaring, and this is what he's saying, this is his words, the people, this is what the mayor said, remember, the people were terrified because this beam of night light had already assaulted several people. The whole community was packed in only 3 houses, praying sometimes and singing some religious songs. Because there's comfort in pack, isn't there? There's comfort in people, right? Many of the sightings in this location and during these last weeks of August and early September would meet tragic ends, at least according to local reports. One 45-year-old woman who was attacked by these strange glowing lights would die only 8 hours later. Another fatality occurred when a fisherman came across the glowing orb while on his boat. He would deteriorate and pass away several days later. Now, by the time September was unfolding, the Colares Island was beginning to be inundated with such strange sightings. Talk of the Chupa Chupa had suddenly become rampant among the locals. Most encounters were extremely similar as well. Luminous objects would appear in the sky overhead and at an increasingly low altitude. They would often fire green rays of light which would paralyse or render the person unconscious. Most bizarrely, people would often find strange markings on their body and have the genuine belief that the UFO, whatever it was, had removed a significant amount of their blood. One particular sighting was that of a 44-year-old fisherman who, along with several colleagues, would witness an umbrella-shaped object hovering over the Rio Nova beach as they walked towards their fishing boats. There was no sound coming from the strange craft. Then a strange white light shot out from the craft's underside and the object moved away from the witnesses. Wherever you turned at this time, a local would have an account to tell. One local said, this is his account, right? I was there with my wife, Palmyra, in front of the church on the seafront, when at about 8 p.m. we saw an intensely vivid orangish light coming in from the sea towards the town. As it approached, it climbed and then moved rapidly, vanished towards the inner part of the island. Okay, so that's his account of that. On another occasion, 3 women were hit in the chest by the strange beams as they walked home. This was caused all 3 tremendous nervous tension as well as constant electric shocks. That's strange, isn't it? Perhaps even more bizarre encounter is that of 49-year-old Carlos Cardoso de Paula. He would state that he was smoking a cigarette in his hammock when a ball of fire came out of nowhere and burst into his home. He would state that this strange ball then went round and round the room. It would finally come to rest on his leg. He would state, right, then I started to feel feeble and sleepy. My cigarette fell from my hand and I come to and let out a yell. As he screamed out due to the pain of the dropped cigarette, the glowing ball vanished from the room. He would state his belief that the orb was searching for a vein in my body, but was unsuccessful. That was his words, okay? Now, a well-respected fishing net repairman would also have a strange encounter with this mysterious lights. At around 4 a.m. one morning, he and his friends were fishing on the Kajawu beach. Suddenly, his friend exclaimed, "There it is!" and promptly ran off in fear. When the fisherman looked up, he could see an object roughly the size of a helicopter, but which made no sound whatsoever. As he watched, a type of searchlight emerged from the craft and began to make sweeping motions of the beach. He would describe the light as bluish, sort of cold, which illuminated the ground underneath it. Suddenly, overcome with fear as he would, he turned and ran towards his friend. They would manage to avoid detection, and the craft continued inland away from them. So they kind of hid from it, didn't they? Now, around the same time as the above account, another account would unfold. What makes this one stand out is the claim of occupants inside the glowing craft. Okay, so this one actually saw aliens. Now, on the evening of the 18th of October 1977, Club Mira will witness the apparent Chupa Chupas themselves. However, What made her encounter stand out from the others in the region was her claim to witness occupants actually inside the craft. She would claim to wake one evening with a bizarre green glow washing over her house. As she became fully awake, the light turned a red colour. It was then she noticed that the light was touching her face. She would later state, and again her words, I could see a creature, like a man, wearing a jumpsuit just like a diver. He pointed at me, and the object shone 3 times, striking my chest during the 3 occasions, almost in the same place. It was hot, it wounded me. It seemed that I had needles piercing at all 3 points. I was terrified, and I couldn't feel my legs. Now, following the incident, she would suffer from severe headaches, as well as a general feeling of weakness for several days. She also discovered burn marks on her chest. Even stranger, these marks were 3 small circles in a triangular shape. She would later state, upon looking at the burn marks, that it was hot and it hurt. It was like a needle stick. Now, after all that's been going on, okay, let's talk about Operation Plate, all right? Such was the activity taking place that by late October 1977, the Brazilian Air Force would install the Regional Air Command, COMAR, Comando Aéreo Regional, on the island. And what's more, they would soon put into action Operation Plate, okay? The person in charge of directing the military research was Captain Urang Bolivar Soares Nogueira de Hollander Lima. Okay, their presence would, at least in part, prove to be of great benefit to the residents of the Colares Islands. They would, for example, offer psychological assistance to those suffering the after effects of sightings and encounters. They would also, and perhaps more importantly to a UFO researcher, obtain hundreds of pictures of these strange crafts. As well as 4 separate video films of the strange activity, they would, according to locals in the region, place several technical devices along the beachfront. Now, the military personnel were shocked at the bizarre showings. For example, reports would marvel how the brightness of the lights were more akin to illuminations at major sporting events. They would also state that these lights were always sharply defined and directed with perfect precision towards any target. In fact, even the military's own helicopter was subject to these bizarre lights. On one occasion, a military helicopter was forced to the ground. There is no official explanation available. One local resident claimed to have witnessed the incident. She would claim to have noticed a strange craft in the sky, round and all luminous. A moment later, a military helicopter approached it. She would continue, again her words, then we saw the UFO direct a very powerful beam onto the helicopter, forcing it to land on the Say Pedro airfield. One thing for certain, though, the military group would approach the unfolding events with the utmost seriousness. The operation would run until January 1978. During that time, as well as the photographs and video footage of the incidents, they would interview hundreds of residents regarding their encounters. Now, perhaps most interesting, especially when we consider that a higher percentage of UFO sightings than not appear near large bodies of water, were the reports from residents and soldiers alike who would claim to witness these strange crafts diving into or coming out of water near nearby Marshu Bay. Okay, so underground water bases. We've come across this before, haven't we? Although their presence in the region would end in January, the investigation would last a further 4 months until May 1978. And even then, it would carry on in a private capacity. Incidentally, the Brazilian military would make their findings classified. It wasn't until 2005 when, through Freedom of Information requests, that the full documents were released to the public. Among details suppressed was that many victims did suffer severe burns and there were at least 2 deaths. These figures remain hotly debated, by the way. It was Captain Yu Rang's view that the UFOs were taking blood samples. Now, this actually is Captain Yu Rang talking about the very thing. So have a listen.
E não foi difícil imaginar que eles estivessem fazendo nessas coisas que viraram até como chacota, viraram chupa-chupa, que eles estivessem fazendo coleta de material. Que eles estivessem coletando sangue para ver o que estava contido naquele sangue que pudesse danificá-los num contato necessário futuro. Certo? Então, e não só o sangue, como também material, células. Eu não sei o que essa luz com alta energia, o que ela podia fazer, se ela podia transportar esse material também. Partículas do corpo, pedaços do corpo, tá? Que pudesse ser mais tarde analisado por ele. Ou talvez até hoje está em moda esse negócio de clonagem. Uma partícula que tivesse DNA que ele pudesse fazer uma repetição. Isso já é recente. Na época eu não pensei nada disso. Tá? Mas pensei que ele estivesse coletando material para se defender num contato que tivesse necessidade de fazer um contato próximo e que pudesse ser verificado por alguma
Agora, a população da...
Eu já tenho minhas razões pessoais. Mas mesmo que eu não as tivesse, se eu fosse comandante, eu mandaria.
O que o senhor imagina que foi feito da operação para os documentos?
Acho que estão arquivados, sem dar muito valor a isso. Não tive conhecimento de nenhuma repercussão disso no Ministério da
500 fotografias, dezenas de filmes.
Não foram 500 fotografias para eles. Foram as fotografias contidas no relatório. Alguns negativos. A maioria foram com nós.
Em Belém. Existe alguém lá, que o senhor sabe, que esteja tomando conta desse material?
Ele está guardado no segundo comando e você não vai obter nada a respeito disso. Ninguém abre isso.
Tem alguém tomando conta, alguém cuidando, mantendo isso aqui?
A minha seção, a qual eu pertenci, ele fica guardado, mas você não terá sucesso nenhum. Ninguém abre, nem Brasília, nem Belém. Os meus filmes, os 4 filmes que foram feitos, de filmadora, eu falei que foram mais de 500 fotografias. Mas os filmes foram feitos 4. Um era do Ministério da Aeronáutica. 3 eram meus. Os 4 foram para o Ministério da Aeronáutica, eu nunca tive meus de volta. Os outros foram comprados com o meu dinheiro, foram feitos por mim e a Aeronáutica nunca me devolveu.
O senhor nunca pensou em guardar um souvenir desse material?
Não, veja bem, eu lhe falei, a Força Aérea foi e é a minha vida. Eu adoro a Força Aérea Brasileira. Muito mais quando estava lá dentro. Tá? Hoje eu fico de fora, vendo como é que meus companheiros, os que me sucederam, como é que estão fazendo com ela, para que ela prospere, para que ela progrida, para que ela se engrandeça. Eu sempre tive um respeito muito grande pela Força Aérea e pelo meu serviço. E eu nunca faria isso com a Força Aérea. Fiquei calado 20 anos. Fui consultado, fui procurado várias vezes. Me pediram que eu escrevesse, que fizesse declaração. Você mesmo, você me pediu, eu não posso falar. Hoje não, hoje estou na reserva.
E para os militares que permanecem na aeronáutica, que sabem que existem esses documentos e que a população tem o direito de conhecê-los, você não acha que vai ter um certo embaraço? Você não acha que esses documentos deveriam ser liberados para o público?
Aí já é decisão de comando. Eu acho que, a minha opinião, é aquela que se diz. Se abrir, se disser, logo em seguida vem outras perguntas que o Ministério da Aeronáutica, o governo brasileiro não tem resposta. Para evitar esse constrangimento, não se fala nada. Uma vez eu estava assistindo o Flávio Cavalcante, um interrogatório sobre isso, um cara perguntou, essa coisa, por que eles não pousam no Maracanã, para todo mundo ver? Se acontecer um caso desse, um pouso na esplanada do Planalto, aí não tem jeito. O que eu acredito é que em futuro próximo, bem próximo, e posso ser até um pouco mais abusado do que eu estou te dizendo, não chega a 2 anos, esse evento vai acontecer. Dentro de 1 ano e meio a 2 anos, esse evento vai acontecer. Contato claro, aberto, todas as televisões do mundo, CNN, Globo, todo mundo dentro. Isso deve acontecer dentro de um futuro bem próximo. Vocês entendem a minha posição? Antigamente não dava, eu ficava...
Perfeitamente.
Falasse qualquer coisa, isso... Primeira coisa que chegava o ministro, se chegasse a público na televisão, provavelmente que eu tivesse o desplante chegar na televisão, eu vi porque não sei o que, alguma coisa assim. O ministro chegava na televisão e disse, o coronel não está, o capitão não está autorizado a falar, não há nenhum crédito da Força Aérea a esse assunto, e eu ficava numa situação muito de babaca, essa história toda. O capitão não está autorizado, não tem nenhum valor a declaração dele. Hoje eu sou da reserva, eu sou... Vou falar o que quiser. Pode me prender que eu estou morrendo.
So, what do you think? That's Captain Urang, Hollanders. What do you think? Do you think he's telling the truth? I mean, obviously I do. He was there. Now, although the military presence would leave in January 1978, the encounters would continue deep into that year. For example, in May of that year, a journalist and photographer were in the area following up the encounters for a story. The particular evening, the heavy rain was pouring down. They would awake to a powerful beam of light. Furthermore, this light would pass through the metallic structure of the roof of the vehicle. Now, each of them would jump out of the car to see what was happening. They could see a tube-shaped light beam. It was around 25 centimetres in diameter, and one of the pair would recall later and say it was coming down from above onto the roof of the car and passing through the metal panelling. On another occasion, the UFO emitted such a vivid beam of light that it smashed the windscreen. Now, despite the continuing sightings, the wider the accounts become known, the more stories began to emerge that the sightings were nothing more than weather balloons or secret satellites. These reports were met with anger from local residents who had been terrified for almost a year by these suddenly increasing sightings. UFO researchers would also dismiss these findings, especially those who had spent considerable time studying the phenomena. It would seem to them that a cover-up was already in motion, and it would seem, when we examine the comments of the person in charge of the military operation, at least on the ground 20 years later. Okay, this last detail was another that will strike the captain about the incident, how it was always the left breast of a woman or the left arm or leg that the beam would target. This is an interesting observation. If we accept that the reason for these attacks on the residents of the Colares Island was to obtain blood from their victims, does the left-hand side of the attack match with the location of the heart on the left side of the body? He would further reveal that while military doctors would examine, record and analyse the burns and wounds, they would not treat them. Some of the victims would recover relatively quickly, while others would take much longer to do so. All who came in contact with these strange glowing crafts, however, would suffer some form of illness. Perhaps his next statement is one that suggests some kind of secret government project. He would claim that it seems that the nature of this light was that of a very strong energy that left people paralysed. I believe that the federal authorities were informed of this type of attack on human beings, that they were happening in the region, but I am unaware of any tests. I only receive orders from my commander, nothing more. As insightful as the interview that the captain would give in October 1977, where the events would unfold after, and I suggest you try and find that on the internet, on YouTube. I've took a snippet, but check it out. Sadly, less than 3 months after the interview came, the discovery of the captain's body was found. Officially, and with no suicide note or apparent reason to do so, he would hang himself using his belt. As you imagine, there are some that do not believe the suicide claims. To them, it is clear that the captain was a murder victim, perhaps a warning to anyone else looking to give interviews, a way of shutting him up. So, what should we make of the bizarre encounters of 1977 and 78? And if the researchers, who we believe that the captain's death was a case of murder and not suicide, are correct, what does that tell us of the reach and importance of the case? Why was he silenced? Was this wave one of extraterrestrial visitors taking samples of blood from the local population? And if so, why was there an apparent focus on female blood samples? Might this tie in with the claims of some that such alien encounters and abduction events are geared towards a hybridization project involving humans and alien DNA? Or might the event have been military experiments? But I can't see that. Whatever did take place, whether military or extraterrestrial in nature, the attacks were very much pre-planned and purposeful, even down to the apparent attempt to attack many of their victims while they slept. Furthermore, although there was no solid proof of the removal of blood tests, would indicate such activity when they showed lower levels of hemoglobins in their blood. So, what do you think? What do you think of the Colares incident, Brazil, 1977? Were they UFOs? Were they government? Okay, each one's a little bit shady, isn't it, really? Why were they collecting blood? Was it for a hibernization program? I probably think it was. Okay, well, look, this was the Tinfoil Hat Fan Club. Please like and subscribe. Drop me a line if you want. And if you want to have a chat, drop me a message. And if not, I will catch you on the next one. Thanks very much.